Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
In a career spanning nearly 40 years, Steve Daniel has had a profound impact on what we drink in the UK. First at Oddbins, where he was buying director in its pomp, and since 2010 at Hallgarten Wines, he's always championed new styles and regions, as well as what he calls the underdog. Listen to us chat about what makes a great retailer, his enduring love affair with Greece, his brewing skills, and why fine wine can come from anywhere these days. Hi Steve, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Yep.
I would ask you where you are, but I know where you are because we live in the same street. So you're about 200 yards away from me. But I can't believe it's taken us so long to make the technology work.
Exactly. Sorry about that.
A couple of old farts, really, aren't we? That's the problem.
One old fart, I think. Yeah.
Listen, great to be talking to a wine legend, and so that's you, not me, by the way, because I can't talk to myself. Lots of stuff I want to ask you about, the old days, about what you're up to now, and about the future, really, because I think, we had a good chat the other day about where the wine world is going, and it's, it's interesting, I think, and possibly problematic, but. I noticed on your bio that you're one of a number of people I've had on this podcast recently, originally trained as a chef. Yeah. Were your parents foodies?
No, not at all. I was brought up in Harrogate, a working class family, very simple, fairly grey food, to be honest, tasty but simple. Never drank wine at home, wasn't brought up with wine, and really didn't get into wine or food until I went away abroad for the first time. I went to Greece and washed up in Greece. And
how old were you when you went to Greece?
Late, sort of 19. Yeah. And then tasted, Greek food and smelt the air and things and thought, wow, all these smells and flavors and things are all different and alien. And when I get back, I want to try and sort of replicate these. So I got the sort of food bug first. And so I really took it seriously, and I used to make dinner parties and everything like that. And then I thought I better do it properly. So I went and trained as a chef, did my 7061 and 7062. And there, my mentor and tutor, a guy called Brian Dennison, said, you're quite bright for a chef, because this was back in the 70s, not the glamour days of now. And you're very committed, and do you like wine? I said, I've no idea. I've never had any. And he said, well, I do this course for people. He said, not your age group, you're 18, 19. These are all 55-year-old lawyers and doctors and whatever. But he said, come along. I said, well, I've got no money. And he said, you don't have to pay. We'll sort it out. And come along and see if you like wine. So that was it. And I tasted a wine, the Puy-Fumé Michel Red. And I just thought, wow, wine can smell like this and taste like this. So I kind of got sidetracked by that point and thought, well, forget about the food bit. I'm into wine.
So were you still doing the chef course at that point?
I'd just about finished it. Yeah, I was still doing it, and just about qualified as that. And then I thought, no, that's not what I want to do. It looks like too much like hard work. I'd done some placements in kitchens and whatever, and it was stressful and it's late hours and whatever. I thought, wine, that's rock and roll lifestyle. I'm going to become a wine buyer.
So you hadn't even had wine when you were in Greece? What were you drinking? Ouzo or something?
Ouzo. Anything we could afford, really. The cheapest alcohol for the buck, yeah.
Yeah. And what did your parents think when you came back and said, I want to be a chef? Did they enjoy the food?
Well, the strange thing, it wasn't that alien to them. They liked the food I was cooking for them. It wasn't that alien because my granddad actually was a chef. He used to work in the big kitchens in the big hotels in Harrogate. So to them, it wasn't that alien. They just thought, oh, well, he's taking after his granddad, But the wine thing was a bit more alien. So, well, you don't know anything about wine, as most of my mates said. I said, well, you know nothing about wine. How can you be a wine buyer? I said, well, I'm going to teach myself.
So when was that then? So the late 70s?
In the late 70s.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the same vintage as you pretty much. And, my parents didn't really drink wine. I mean, the occasional bottle of Matthias or, Lutemelaski Riesling or Veuve du Vernet. I mean, it just wasn't thing that a thing that most normal families did. I don't think, was it in those days?
It's true. Yeah, no, they didn't. It was I was brought up by with a family, but it was more likely to be a Mackeson,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
or a Tetley's.
A whiskey mac. That's what my
Exactly.
gran used to drink. A whiskey
Cabbies
mac.
and
I mean, my parents are not from Yorkshire, but from the Midlands, and it was whiskey mac. I mean,
Yeah.
my grandparents never drank wine. But
Yeah.
I mean, what about this thing that you studied hotel management, didn't you, at Leeds Polytechnic? Was that after that?
Well, yeah. Basically, I decided that that I'd better have a fallback position in case my master plan of becoming a wine buyer didn't work. And I thought, well, I may as well go into an industry that I kind of like. I've got a touch for the food bit, and I think I might be able to travel and do things if in the hotel industry. So I thought I better get a formal qualification just to fall back.
Yeah. And did you get it?
Yeah. No, I did an HND in hotel management and was top student, top marks, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, managed
So
to
you
get
qualified to run a hotel?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I got a piece of paper. Yeah.
And tell us a bit more about that. That light bulb moment when you had this pre-fume. I mean, what did you suddenly think? Hey, I'm smelling something here that I've never smelt before.
Yeah, it was kind of that, or it was I'm smelling things here that I can smell in the outside in the world. Whether it's a hedgerow or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that wine could taste like that. And then I suppose a true light bulb moment came at the end of this course. There was like 5 lots of courses and tastings, and Brian put on a blind tasting. And at this point, I was buying anything I could, there wasn't a lot I could afford, and there wasn't a lot out there. It was obviously things like Bulgarian varietals at that point. And I'd bought a Chilean Cabernet, and basically there was only 2 in the market at that point. There was Conchitoro, sorry, my cat has joined me, and Conchitoro and Cusino Macul, I think it was. And I'd tried one of them before, Cusino Macul, about the week before this tasting. I went, wow, that's amazing. It smells black currants and And this blind tasting came along, and I thought, whoa, this smells of black currants and things. It must be Chilean Cabernet, but it's not the one I tried the other day. It must be the other one that's in the market, which was Conchitoro, I think. And so I said, it's Conchitoro Cabernet. And it was. and everyone went, oh my God, he's only done 5 lessons and he can do that. So basically he said, yeah, I think you need to be in the wine trade.
It's interesting. It's showing you the powers of deduction in a way that you knew there were only 2 in the marketplace, and you thought, but also showing that you've got this gift, really, that you could spot stuff.
Yeah, I suppose so. That I could log it in my head and think, well, it's very similar to the one I've tried before, but it's not it. So.
Yeah, okay, yeah, good. I mean, you got a job as a shop assistant, Martinez Fine Wines in Ilkley, so not too far from where you. Yeah.
Which was great. It was the halcyon days of Rioja in those days, because there was all the amazing 70s vintages coming through, and they were for nothing. And Martinez was a Spanish specialist, so I was brought up on 73 Gran Reservas from La Rioja Alta and things like that. And so I was very lucky. And being a small operator, I got access and tasted a lot, which was great.
Yeah, and then you went to Arthur Rackham, didn't you? Was that down in London?
It's down in London because I thought, well, I can't be a wine buyer up here, so I've got to go south. Go to London, young man, and make your fortune. So I went to Rackham's, and they said, yes, we'll take you on as a trainee buyer, but in reality, they wanted me as a relief manager. So I did relief management for about 6 months and realized that I wasn't going to get trained as a buyer there. And my wife, a girlfriend at the time, lived in Muswell Hill, and she said, I've just seen an advert for she was in Belsize Park. She said, I've seen an advert for a trainee buyer. No, in Oddbins, they put it in the paper, local paper. So I went into the local shop and said, I want to join you guys at Oddbins, and I'll do anything to get on the track. And the guy said, well, you've just timed it right, because we do have a vacancy as a trainee buyer. We just got a notice through from head office. Would you like me to put your name forward?
You went, all right. And you got the job?
Yes, please. I mean, very lucky.
But I mean, Oddbins had started in the '60s, hadn't it? But was it starting to become the force that it became in the '80s and '90s at that point, or not?
Not really. Funnily enough, I mean, I knew a few people in the trade down here, and I was looking around to see where I could go and forward my career. And they said, when I said, look, I've got an opportunity as a trainee to go for a job as a trainee buyer at Oddbins, they all said, don't do it. They said they're going to be bust in a year. And I said, really? And they said, oh, no, they're going through all sorts of problems and things like that. You don't want to go there. That'll be a false start. But I just thought, no, I'm going to go. I'm going to go
and give it a go.
Yeah. And it wasn't a false start. It was the start of something great because, good, really intelligent people at head office who had a real feel for retail, and some amazing people in the stores. I mean, incredibly bright, well-educated wine fanatics who sort of
with PhDs, weren't they, a lot of the time?
Absolutely. I mean, way cleverer than me. Yeah. And they ran their stores like entrepreneurially. It was like their store,
Yeah.
So put a bit of management and nous at the head office and sort of really motivate and get these guys firing on all cylinders, and that was Oddbins, because I could have been the greatest wine buyer in the world, but if I didn't have the people at the sharp end, it would never have worked.
And was John Ratcliffe there by then, who was the MD?
John was there. John had just joined from the stores, and he just started the exploration of Australia. I remember when I first arrived, there was about 20 containers of cheap Australian wine on the water. And one of my first jobs was to be in the tasting room QCing them with the guys, saying, are they okay? Are we good here? We haven't made a huge mistake. So so it was perfect timing for me, because Oddbins was going places. It had investment. We were part of Seagram then, so money wasn't an issue, which I think previously it had been.
Yeah. So you and John Ratcliffe kind of changed the culture, didn't you?
The culture was there, I think, in certainly the stores. But what we decided to do was really go for it. And we saw that both of us were a little bit sort of non-conventional, and we decided that wine wasn't an elitist thing, and we wanted to sort of make it far more for the people, if you like. We're a bit communist in our views, and we just wanted to kind of demystify it all. And we thought this was a time when Blue Nun was still popular, Black Tower, all of the Liebs were massive, and the Hirondelles and Don Cortezes and
Don Cortez.
Yeah. And it was still all of that kind of stuff, plus the classic drinkers that were drinking their claret and their Chablis. So we decided there's got to be something more to that. And France and Spain and Italy had sat on their laurels, and they had great vineyards and maybe great history, but their technology wasn't great. And they were not, it was like, well, my dad did it this way, so I'm going to continue.
Yeah.
So we thought that the New World was a much better treasure trove in a way, because no one had been there really, and they were making reliable, affordable wines. So we went.
And what did you change in? Sort of Australia, Chile?
Yeah. I mean, John was Australia, and I was Chile. I was the first gringo wine buyer in Chile back in '88.
Yeah.
I went out there, which was quite interesting at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was still Pinochet years, wasn't it?
It was just after. It was a year after Pinochet, I think, and there was no infrastructure, and most of the wineries, even the big guys that we know today, had basic wineries with the old Rowley barrels still in them, and very little stainless steel around. But again, you could see the quality of the fruit in the vineyard, and there was an opportunity there. So we went for that big time as well. I mean, John was always one for saying, don't do it half-heartedly. If you're going to do something, you've got to make a statement. So don't go and buy 1 shilling wine, or don't go
buy 50.
Yeah, when you can buy 50, exactly.
Yeah. What were the highlights of your time there? I mean, winning lots of awards. I mean, because you progressed very quickly, didn't you? From trainee buyer to senior buyer to really directing. Well, you're buying director at the end.
Yeah, buying marketing director at the end of it. Yeah, it was really quick, very rapid. I was very lucky. I mean, luck has got a lot to do with it. Serendipity, if you like, or whatever. Yeah. I mean, having a good basic talent and a good vehicle to drive, if you like, and
Yeah.
I had a good vehicle and
Yeah.
a bit of talent.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you were perceived as a new world specialist. I don't mean you, I mean Oddbins, but you sold a shed load of champagne, and there were
Yeah,
good Burgundies. You even did en primeur Bordeaux, didn't you? And took the cash out of it in a sense. You took the risk out of it, didn't you?
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, we'd look anywhere that gave good wine, I think, and so we had amazing Burgundies. We had all the top guys, Laflaves and Sauzet and Ramonet and all those guys. So we did that. Bordeaux, as you say, we did en primeur on the shelf. We actually bought the wines, put the £1,000,000 down,
Yeah,
and then sold them to our customers when they were in at retail prices. We
yeah,
took all the risk out and by the bottle.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
wanted to do things differently, and we weren't. We did a lot in the New World, but we certainly weren't New World specialists. We were big into the south of France in those
yeah,
days. Even believed in that. We're down into the Roussillon and the Languedoc.
yeah.
So we'd go wherever there was good wine,
Yeah,
basically.
and at good value. We're going to talk about
Yeah,
value later, but and there was this Greece thread again in your life. That Greece was the first place you went
yeah.
overseas. What made you want to become a chef? And you became fascinated by the wines, didn't you? I mean, you listed Greek wines pretty early on. When would you have started listing those?
In the 90s.
Hmm.
In the 90s, 25 years ago. 25 years I've been pushing Greece now.
I know they finally got there.
Yeah, well, I don't give up. I think it's worth banging that drum. You may as well keep banging it.
Yeah.
I
And you got a
told
house on Santorini, haven't you?
Yeah. I bought that in 2000. It was one of those again serendipitous
Mm.
moments. I'd wanted a house back from those days when I first went to Greece as a penniless beach bum, and I saw this plot that was an old wrecked canava, an old winery in Pyrgos, and it was wrecked. It was a total wrecked cave winery, but it had an amazing view. So I just decided, yeah, I'll buy it.
And did it
And
up.
my wife said, "You're crazy." My mates said, "I'm crazy," but I just bought it and did it up. I said, "Yeah, I know, but look at that view, and it's a winery. It's got to be, it's meant to happen."
And probably the smartest investment you ever made, was it?
Yeah. I'm not that good at making smart investments, but that was one of them. Yeah,
Who is? I mean,
yeah,
you left Oddbins in 2003, a year after the French company Castel had bought it. Before that, it was owned by Seagam, obviously.
yeah.
Had the culture changed a bit with the French coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I'd got to a stage in life where I was used to autonomy, and that's
Yeah.
what we gave everybody in the business. You know, a sense of it was on them, but they could do what they liked, as long as they came up with the results. And I realized that it wasn't going to be like that with a new owner. It was going to be a job, a 9 to 5, if you like,
Yeah.
and that it wouldn't be. I wouldn't be allowed to be as creative as I had been previously. So I thought it's time for me to move on. So I did.
So you had to answer to what to other French buyers or what?
Yeah.
There was a sort of top senior buyer, wasn't there, at Castel or something?
Yeah, no, you would have to put everything through the board, and that was primarily French and Castel.
Yeah. So
So
did they change the wines as well that Oddbins listed?
they were wanting to bring in more French because it was an area that they were more comfortable with in a way,
Yeah.
and they had a strategy, and it didn't correspond with what I thought the strategy for the business should be. So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought, well,
So you left?
there's no point in hanging around
Yeah,
and
exactly.
arguing. You may as well move. So I did.
Yeah. And you set up your own business, which was Novum, but you also did some consultancy, didn't you, at that point?
Yeah. When I left, I worked with a few of the big boys like Conchitoro, particularly on the Argentinian project, which was Trivento,
Yeah.
and they wanted me to go over and see if there was a potential there, and because they were not getting the right wines out of the winery, and so I went there and I tasted the wines, and they had great wines in the winery. They were just not putting it together correctly for the market. So it was easy. It was one of those little disconnects that they had between the market and the winemaking, or not even the winemaking. It's just how they presented the final blends. I mean, the winemaker was very talented, knew exactly what they were doing, and great raw material, but just put together wrongly. It's it's like being a chef and somebody wants a roast Yorkshire dinner or whatever, and you give them with the same ingredients, you give them some coq au vin, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It was
And you probably could have made a career just doing that, couldn't you? A very lucrative one.
possibly, yeah. I mean, yeah. But it coincided with me becoming a dad, and my wife and I were bringing up a child. So I thought, well, I could, but it's a risky business because you freelance, you know that, and you don't have you don't know where your next pound is coming from in sometimes. So I thought, well, I better get a proper job as well, basically.
And so that was Novum, really. But you had a backer, didn't you? Did you have a backer? Yeah.
Yeah. It was a great guy called Amit Ben Haim, Israeli entrepreneur, who rang me up and said, "Look, I saw what you did at Oddbins, and I want to set up a company that does the same sort of thing, which is taking undiscovered or not very well known wine regions or new winemakers in a region and bringing them to the market." I said, "Great, you're talking my language. Let's do it." So we did, and we were very successful and grew rapidly. But then, when you grow rapidly, you need more finance and da 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 da. And then came the crash around the end of 2008, 2009. So Amit said, "Look, I think you'd be better off as a business and the guys, if you moved on to somebody another home that can look after you and keep you going." So we ended up with Hallgarten, which was great.
So Hallgarten took over the business effectively.
Yeah.
And that's where you've been ever since, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
And a good home. You've got a degree of autonomy there again, haven't you?
Absolutely, in a way that Novum came into the system because Hallgarten wanted a bit of zhuzhing up, if you like. Always been a very steady, reliable importer with a good, fairly traditional portfolio. So they just wanted a little bit more of that sort of cutting edge wines that maybe that I'm known for. So
Hallgarten is quite on-trade, restaurant focused, isn't it? I just wonder, when you're buying wines, do you think, this is an on-trade wine and this is an off-trade one, in other words, a retail wine, or is a good wine work in either scenario?
Yeah, the last one. A good wine should work in either scenario, to be honest. I think if you're buying, the wines will work. I mean, it depends on the kind of type of wines you like, I suppose. If you go for massively fruit-forward wines all the time, they're not going to be appealing to a sommelier. But I don't buy that kind of wine.
No.
I tend to look for mineral, intriguing, interesting wines. So I naturally sort of maybe go, even though I'm a retailer in the background, I go for that kind of wine that won't be out of place in a restaurant.
They'll work in both sets, both places, really.
But we are primarily restaurant and a bit of independent. But then I think that's where all of the action is, to be honest. I think sommeliers are wine enthusiasts. They want their customers to have good wines, and independent wine merchants, a lot of them are ex-Oddbins guys anyway, and they want the interesting, intriguing wines.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested by what you think makes a good buyer. You've been a very successful one, because it's not just about being a good taster, is it? I just wonder how important things like negotiating skills, getting on with people, commercial acumen, maybe speaking to them in their own language, all of those things. I mean, do they make somebody a better buyer, do you think?
I think understanding what the producer wants to achieve, I think, is one thing, and what you're looking for. I mean, my job is to go and find the best example of whatever it is, in my opinion, and then get a good price for it. So negotiation comes into it, but it's not a matter of being a hard ass, bang the table beast that just wants to knock everything down for the sake of it. It's getting it at the right price for the market, and then being able to explain that to the producer. And if they understand that, they're more likely to say, "Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. You don't just want a 40% discount for the fun of it because you've been told to. It's you see where it fits, and you can you explain to them, this is your peer group, this is where they are, this is where you need to be." So I think it needs some people skills. In terms of language, I wish I spoke a foreign language. I don't. I would have been probably a much better buyer if I did. But
if you spoke Greek.
Yeah, exactly. So it hasn't held me back that much, but I think it's a massive advantage to be able to speak a language, and it's one of my biggest regrets.
Well, it's interesting that you also talk about the second most important thing about buying, in a way, the role is finding a home for it. It's not just buying it. Anybody can do that. It's thinking about selling it. I mean, that's important too, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we were taught at Oddbins, or we taught ourselves, is there's no point in us buying something unless we can communicate it primarily to our salespeople or to the consumer to create a demand. And very often we were buying wines that had no demand at all. We had to
create the demand. Yeah,
exactly. So, and that's something that I strongly believe in now. So, whenever I go and buy something, I'm speaking to our salespeople. I'm speaking to people like yourselves, so opinion formers and the journalists, and so that there's not just me talking about it. That you make some noise. I say basically you've got to say something 5 times before anyone takes any notice at all.
do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, otherwise, it sort of goes over people's heads, And I'm the same. I'm just a basic consumer. So if somebody tells me something once, I'll think, yeah, okay. But if I keep getting hit with the same message, I'll get it eventually.
Do you think, okay, there's something there? I want to ask you. I mean, looking at the wine trade now, really, which countries and regions do you think offer the best value for money and the worst?
Oh, right, okay. Well, the worst, without slagging too many people off, I think. If you buy big names, if you go for the big, well-established names, you're not going to get great value. I mean, there's no wine on this planet that's worth £1,000 or whatever. No. So there's areas, that produce those kind of wines that maybe are not great value, but there are people prepared to pay that. So there's the Burgundies of this world, and maybe some of the top Bordeaux's. They've gone beyond what they're worth. Whereas there are still bargains in Burgundy and Bordeaux. So you can't sort of generalize. It's just that some places are a little bit more expensive. And a lot of the trophy wines, I think, are just massively overpriced.
Yeah. So avoid famous names in a way.
I've always tried to find an alternative and don't pay, thousands of times the worth of that bottle just for a 5% incremental increase in quality in some cases, and maybe not in others. So I always look for the underdog. Maybe I see myself as a bit of an underdog in the trade, so I was always wanting to give the underdog a bit of a hand up. So in terms of current values now, Greece is never cheap. It's not going to be supermarket wine, but it's bang for buck is brilliant at the moment. I think making really intriguing, interesting wines. I think there's a prime example. I think the south of France, Languedoc and the Roussillon, terribly underrated for many years. But there's some fabulous producers in the Roussillon, and again offers real value. So I think if you look at lesser known areas from anywhere, if you look at Italy, everyone now knows about Barolo and Chianti and whatever. But if you go into the Marche and Abruzzo and in the south, go to the south, amazing values. So I don't think there's any one place to look. I think it's just go off the beaten track a little bit.
It's almost a mindset, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I often look at people's Instagram feeds and they're trophy wine drinkers, they're label wine drinkers. I'm not going to name names, but and I look at it and I just think it must be so boring to be you, because all you do is drink wines that are famous that someone else has told you to drink. And I think where's the interest or the excitement in that? I mean, maybe it's I'm saying that because I can't afford to drink those wines, so I've got to find interest elsewhere.
Well, exactly that. No, that's what keeps me going. It's finding the new things. I don't buy very expensive trophy wines. I don't think I've ever bought one in my life. I just don't do it because they're there. They don't need my help in a way. They don't need anyone's help. They've got it sorted. But I think the guys that have put in the time and the blood and the sweat and the tears and the money into it in the lesser known areas need more of everyone's help.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, looking back, that those glory days of Oddbins, in the 80s and 90s, were a golden age, or are we living in a golden age now, or are they just different ages?
I think different ages. I mean, they were great because people were just getting into wine in a way, and a lot of the new people into wine didn't have the baggage, I suppose, of the past, so they were open to Australia or Chile or the south of France or wherever. There was more options for the average consumer as well. I think even then the supermarkets were making a massive effort to up their wine offering and had some really interesting wines. And we had more competition on the high street at Oddbins. We had wine rack and people that had good offerings of wine. Zintumbrecht and things on the shelf. And I think a lot of that dumbed when Oddbins went. Everybody kind of dumbed. I mean, there's always been proper wine merchants, and they've been there constantly, even when Oddbins were there and afterwards. And I think, there are great little specialists who've sprung up. but the offering on the high street has been dumbed down a little bit, I
Yeah,
think.
but it's interesting looking back at all the number of just high street chains that have disappeared.
Yeah,
Victoria Wine, they had a premium offering,
yeah,
and the Thresher Wine Rack Group, and Unwins and Davisons and
yeah,
Fullers, and all those people had very good shops with good
yeah.
buyers. And
They did.
I think you're right that in terms of what's available on the high street, it's not great really anymore.
No.
But what's replaced it is some really good independence. A proliferation of independence, really.
Absolutely. And in a way, I mean, they've got more raw material to work with than
Yeah.
we had, because
Yeah.
I think the quality of wine generally has increased
Yeah,
massively.
I think that's true. I mean, how do you think the next 20 years are going to develop? And do you think new regions will emerge? Will old ones disappear? And particularly bearing in mind things like climate change. I mean, we've discussed this between us a couple of times and thought, are there places that are famous still, just about that in 20 years might not be regarded in the same way?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think things are changing already, and the consumer is not stupid. The one thing that a lot of people do is underestimate the customer, and they should never do it, because they are flexible and they will adapt to change, and they do. And you just look back for the 20, 30 years I've been in the industry, that there's been massive changes in wine drinking habits.
Mm.
So they will continue. So if a region doesn't give people what they want, and or at the price that they can afford, they will switch. I mean, so Bordeaux will always have the elite wines there. I'm not getting away from that, but maybe entry level Bordeaux, sort of like claret, might not be a thing anymore. People might not say, "Oh, I want a decent glass of red wine. I'm going to buy a claret." They won't be saying that, because they'll think, "Well, I'll go to Abruzzo, or
Yeah.
I'll go to Chile, or I'll go to Argentina if I want that. I'm not going to go there." So I don't think those areas will disappear, but they'll become less important to the UK consumer, I think.
Mm. And what about climate change? Are you noticing that effect already in some of the regions you're
Yeah,
buying?
I mean, I don't think it has a uniform effect. I think
Mm.
there's certain areas that are producing wines now which they couldn't have done maybe 10, 20 years ago. UK being one of them, England,
Yeah.
which is a bit of climate change, but also then, it's now a professional industry. But then there's places like, Chablis, which has always made, sort of world-class wine, but that style has changed. I've seen a
Mm.
stylistic change, and
Mm.
I've seen more stylistic change in the Loire, in Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. If you look at a vintage like 2020, it is like that would never have happened
Mm.
in Sancerre. It's very big and it's rich and
Mm.
it's heavy, and it's not necessarily what I look for. It's atypical.
Mm.
So it's having an effect, and I think it's in certain areas it has a bigger effect. And you look at what's happening in Germany. When I started, German wine was Liebfraumilch, and everything had residual sugar. But now the amount of Trocken wines and the
Mm.
amount of decent red wines,
Yeah.
it's changing. And
Yes, you
there's
can
certain,
reliably make dry white wines basically
yeah,
without having to have residual sugar to balance the acidity. Yeah.
absolutely. So it's, in terms of certain areas, it's helped in a way, and other areas it's definitely not helped.
And could you see a move to places like southern Patagonia and maybe,
Yeah,
more development in Tasmania, maybe, in
yeah,
the Arctic Circle, even, more Scandinavian wines.
yeah. No, I think what you've got to do when you do have global warming, you either move up, so altitude. Argentina's already got pretty high vineyards. But you go up, or you go to the coast, and if you've got a cool mass of water, even better.
Yeah.
So areas that you know are not that well known. I mean, even South Africa. I know it's something very close to your heart. I think
Mm.
South Africa is criminally underrepresented in
Mm.
the UK,
Mm.
and to me, it doesn't seem to be as affected by climate change as other places. And
Mm.
they may not have massive altitude, but
Mm.
they're moving closer to that really cold ocean
Yeah,
that we've got.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I wondered, do you think we need a new definition of fine wine? I was looking at the menu the other day that Prince Charles, King Charles rather now,
Yeah,
was serving to Cyril Ramaphosa, and I thought, oh God, it's Champagne, it's Bordeaux, it's Burgundy, and
yeah,
Sauterne at the end, and you just think it's just so boring. I mean,
yeah,
I just think all that we've lived through and our different ways have had an effect on what people drink.
yeah.
It's as if it hasn't had any impact on the fine wine scene. Is that am I being unfair?
No, I think I think you said earlier on that there's a lot of people that buy trophy wines, and they buy the reassurance of saying, well, I'm putting this on for a dinner party, and nobody can argue with it because look, there's the label, there's the badge. It's not me. If you don't like it, it's your fault because this is a world-class wine. It's a fine wine. But I think it has to change. I mean, and if people want to be normal people, not maybe King Charles, but not normal people want to drink fine wine, they've got to reinterpret fine wine and look elsewhere. I mean, there's nobody can tell me that, some of, the great Chardonnays coming out of South Africa now are not fine wines. People like Richard Kershaw is making extremely great Chardonnays. So and they're world class. They're fine wines, and the
same thing with the Certicos from Santorini. Yeah,
exactly. And there's so many examples of fine wines in lesser known areas. The Roussillon is another one. They've been making fine wines in the Roussillon for a long time, but they're still off the radar. I mean, Gobi and Sula and those guys, pioneers, and now there's more and more people.
Yeah. So fine wine can come from anywhere, I think, don't you? Pretty much.
Yeah. No, as long as it's good wine and people are tasting it with an open mind, I think eventually people will get it. Well, for instance, when you and I started in the trade, Barolo was not revered as it is now. No. It's gone through a massive transformation in terms of quality and appreciation. And now no one would say Barolo wasn't a fine wine.
No, exactly. It's true, isn't it? I just wondered whether you've ever wanted to own a winery yourself. I know you've made beer and you've done a lot of blending, and you're a very good blender because you've got a great palate. And you love getting your hands dirty and creating things by your own admission. Have you ever thought, I really fancy a winery?
I've often thought about it. Yeah, but my wife kind of likes living in the UK, which is fine. And I thought, well, I'm not going to take the really hard path and try and do it in the UK. But I'd say never say never. I would love to make a little bit of wine one day, and it would probably be in Santorini. Why not? We've got a Certico on our back door, and
you're living in an old winery, right?
Exactly. So maybe I've got to do it at some point. But you're right. I mean, I've made beer. We had a little brewery in London for a few years. We still make beer. I'm one of the partners in a brewery on Santorini. So that kind of keeps my creative juices going. But yeah, and I'm getting to a certain age now, though. I don't know whether I can take that challenge. I couldn't take a challenge of trying to make a big winery or anything like that, because it is so much investment
and stress.
And stress, exactly. And I don't need it, to be honest. Leave it to the young kids.
I wondered how you get away from wine. I was intrigued to say that you don't have a cellar at home and you don't actually drink that much. So, I mean, how do you spend your time if you're not drinking wine? I mean, you want to get away from wine. I know I see you in the gym down the road from time to time. How else do you get away from it?
I don't get away from wine because I love it, to be honest. I love wine because it's given me my lifestyle, and it is part of me. I mean, I never switch off. Wine and me at one. I don't log on and log off. But I'm not obsessed. I don't have a cellar because I don't believe in drinking the same wine again and again and again. There's so many wines out there. I want to try as many as possible. And I do drink. Don't worry about that. But maybe not to excess. But I try to keep it in moderation. But some days it's a little bit more than others, as you know, in the industry. But generally speaking, I think you've got to have a healthy respect for wine and drinking it. Otherwise, you don't have a long career, I don't think.
No, and I think you're right about having a healthy respect for alcohol in a way, and for the bad things about it as well as the good things.
Exactly. But so switching off, no, I don't really. I go to the gym, as you say. I think it's really important to keep fit mentally and physically. I've been trying to play the guitar for about 40 years and still fail miserably. So occasionally I'll sit down and have a twang and annoy the neighbours and my wife.
And what about, it all began with you as a chef, with that visit to Greece and thinking, hey, I'm interested in flavour. Do you still like cooking?
Not as much as I used to. I seem to have lost a bit of time somewhere along the line. That I used to have a bit more time, and I'd think, right, I'll do that now. I'll go and do that. I'll go and make a really nice dish for tonight. And also at home, it's difficult. I don't eat meat. My wife doesn't eat fish. So I'd have to cook twice. And when my son was at home and he wasn't at uni, I'd have to cook 3 different meals. And I just thought, you know what? I'll just go to Marks and Spencer's and get a ready meal. It's one for you, one for me, and one for...
Sounds like a good idea. I love it. Listen, Steve, amazing career you've had in wine. And I think everybody who drinks wine in the UK should thank you for all the things you've championed, all the things you've done an amazing job bringing to our palates and to our attention. So thank you from a wine consumer as well as a wine lover and a wine journalist. I think that, what you've done for the UK has been truly amazing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'll see you soon in the gym or outside in the street.
Absolutely. Okay,
my friend. All the best to you. Bye.
Cheers now. Okay, bye.
Steve really is a legend, and we should all be grateful for his incisive palate and sense of adventure. My next guest on Cork Talk after the Christmas and New Year break will be Santiago Achaval from Matavini in Argentina. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.